Mayor Hancock, thanks for sitting down in advance of tonight's town hall.
Absolutely. Good to be with you, and thank you for doing the town hall with us.
Absolutely, looking forward to it. So let's talk about what happened last night at City Council. They approved a nearly $1 million settlement for a former high-ranking firefighter. She claimed retaliation after she filed some sex discrimination claims. You and I both know it's not the only claim like that to come out of Denver Public Safety in the last few years. Are you confident that the issues have been fixed and that Denver Public Safety is a safe and supportive place for women to work?
Kyle, we certainly are aiming for that to be a place where women and people of color feel comfortable working. I got to tell you that we are in the midst of a transition right now. More people of color, more women are coming to the public safety space, and our departments have to transform along with it. We have to evolve. And unfortunately, these settlements become part of the byproduct of that happening. But we're going to have to do it faster. We're going to do it more dramatically. And that's what we're working on through the Department of Safety. These are no longer just bastions of where men work and men, this fraternal organization that can exist. We have to create a more welcoming, open space for women and people of color as they continue to diversify our departments.
So would you describe that as an issue that you think has been addressed or is being addressed?
It's being addressed. It's certainly an ongoing process. It's not something that is going to be done overnight. We're talking about decades of really these being fraternities, particularly the fire department. These houses are fraternities. And so none of this that we're having to settle as a city is okay. I'm not excusing that away, but it is a signal to us that we have to remain very diligent and very focused on evolving the culture of these houses and certainly the department as a whole.
You have appointed Fran Gomez as the interim sheriff while you look for a permanent sheriff. Councilwoman Candi CdeBaca has proposed making that an elected position, as it is in most counties in Colorado. Denver's structure is a little bit different. But what do you think about the idea of an elected sheriff as opposed to somebody who reports to you?
In Denver County, it's not the most intelligent idea to politicize the sheriff's department. You're really talking about the leader who oversees our detention facilities. And you don't want to have politics enter into that. And if you think it's hard, or they think it's hard to get away or to do away with or remove someone who is politically appointed by the mayor, try removing someone who has been elected, because now you're talking about recall and the effort. But the reality is that the mayor is accountable, the Department of the Director of Safety is accountable to making sure that that sheriff serves the job that he or she is being asked to do. And I don't find it very smart to think about politicizing the role of your detention leader in the county of Denver.
And what would you say to somebody that says what's really at issue is power? If there's another elected official in town, that means less power for you and more power for somebody else.
Yeah, you know what? This seems to be kind of the theme with some of the newly elected city council members, to be kind of mesmerized on the power of the mayor. Denver is a city that is 160 years old. Its local government is a model for many cities across this country. As I interact with mayors and county officials around the country, we're in envy of how we're set up and how we're governed. We're able to establish a vision and move it forward. And the more we focus on the power as opposed to really focusing on getting things done in the city, it's a distraction. And it's really a false conversation, because trying to change the charter piece by piece, you're going to create a disaster. I'm trying to understand the challenge that we're trying to address here outside of people's individual interests and egos. Denver has a functioning government that works today, that has allowed the city to become one of the best in the world at what we do in terms of being competitive. And we've got to be really smart and strategic about the things that we tinker with, because we're concerned about our own positioning and our own power base and trying to change it.
Last question on this. You talk about Denver being an envy, having a functioning system. Somebody else could look at the sheriff's office and say that, sheriff's department rather, and say that what we've seen in the last 5-10 years is not a functioning system.
Yeah.
The abuse is there, the issue's there. Why not try out letting that person be accountable to the public?
I was the first person to stand up as mayor of the city and say we need to change this system within our jail, this culture that has been in place for 75 years. The reality is that no matter where you go in this country, we have these kind of settlements occurring when they go unchecked. And so we moved to begin to reform the sheriff's department, hold people accountable, bring in new policies in terms of crisis intervention training, as well as excessive force policies, making sure our sheriff deputies are being held accountable. That is done outside of the political box. That's done because that's the way it should be. Has nothing to do with politics. Has nothing to do how the sheriff is selected. It comes with it's about the accountability of a county, the county of Denver, saying that's not how we're going to treat people regardless of what their purpose for being in the jails. we're going to do better. And that's what we're focused on. Those reforms have now been implemented. We're working to get better. We are seeing improvements going forward, and we're going to continue to work hard at it. And it's a work in progress. But to try to politicize who the sheriff is when you still got 850 deputies who are the ones who are doing the face-to-face dealing with the detainees, it does not solve the problem. You know, you find someone who can implement these reforms and make sure people are being held accountable.
You talked about the changing voices on city council. Councilwoman Candi CdeBaca is arguably the most interesting voice in Denver politics today. She's been a critic of yours, hired another vocal critic of yours to run her staff. What do you make of her impact on city politics so far?
Well, I think you got to remember, I come from city council. At the end of the day, we have to all move forward in the best interest of the people of this city. We can't get into political platitudes, and I can't react dramatically to what any one city council member does or what any one member, a staff member of city council does. The reality is you still got to count to 7 on city council to effect change. We can talk from a bully pulpit all day long, but at the end of the day, people will get tired of just talk. What are you doing to make sure that this city remains vibrant, active, jobs are available, and that people can live in our city? And that's what I'm focused on every day, not the distractions of someone who wants to just try to be disruptive.
You really believe that Councilwoman CdeBaca is just talk and just wants to be disruptive?
I mean, the reality, the point I'm going to lay out to you once again, to do anything on city council, you need 7. And unless you have the majority of council going with you to make that change, all you're doing is talking. I haven't heard one idea that really goes to the heart of how we keep Denver strong and how we address the issues of all people in our great city. You know, the reality is these are community by community issues that we have to address, but at the end of the day, we also have 16,000 people who call Denver home. And we have to make sure we're addressing the issues of everyone across the board. I know Candi CdeBaca. I've known her personally for a long time, and I have respect for Candi CdeBaca. I like Candi. You know, governing is different than being an activist, and I've played both roles in my life. And it's different to be at this place, and where you have to be, where you're accountable for making decisions for everyone, and quite frankly, the activist mentality and attitude doesn't necessarily translate when it comes time to making tough decisions.
Let's talk about transit.
Yes.
City's making some moves in the transit space. Most recently this week to give buses some dedicated lanes. It'll make bus travel faster, and it's going to make single car traffic slower.
Yeah.
Do folks who choose to drive often alone in the city of Denver need to expect more slowdowns, more pain and so forth in the next few years, just as we move towards a mass transit model?
I don't know how I can say it more or even more boldly. 73% single occupied vehicle percent in our city is not sustainable. In fact, it's quite unsustainable for all of us, for our health, our environment going forward. And as we continue to grow as a city, we have to make provisions to become more multimodal, which means our roads, we got to get more out of our roads, which means more transit, means more bike opportunities. And so what you see, particularly on 15th, for example, buses, bikes, automobiles. At the same time, making sure we have a safe provision for pedestrians. That's the direction of Denver. That has to be the direction of Denver, more so for all of our health than anything. So yes, if I'm an automobile, if I'm driving a car every day, I have to start thinking about the fact that I'm going to share the road with different modes of transportation going forward.
RTD is saying it's going to need to significantly reduce service for a time because it simply cannot hire and retain enough operators. Are you interested in the idea of Denver someday standing up its own transit agency?
One of the things that we did in setting up this new Department of Transportation is to make sure it had the ability to do an overlay in transit if necessary. It's embedded in the question that's going before the ballot, before the voters next month. And so absolutely, if we find it necessary to do that, we should have the ability to do that, and that's inherent in the bill we have in front of the people.
But do you think that RTD's struggles are pushing Denver's timeline along?
I think we will always work to coordinate and collaborate with RTD. When we find out that as a last resort that they have been maxed out because they are regional and they're unable to meet the needs of this city, then we will resort to the provision that we have in the department going in front of the people.
Let's talk about public safety. Yeah. So Denver has seen homicide rates climb year after year for the last 4 years. Last year there were 67 homicides. I believe there have been 60 so far this year. Denver's safer than a lot of other large cities, but we don't want to see the homicide rate climbing. Why do you think it's happening?
You know what? I wish we had that answer. I mean, I meet with the chief and the Department of Safety very often, of course, and we're all wondering, why is this happening? I think there's some trends around domestic violence that gives us a hint into some of the numbers that we're looking at. You know, gun violence continues to be a problem not only in Denver but across this nation. But you're absolutely right, Kyle. I mean, 61 I think was the last number I saw with regards to Denver and homicides. You know, I was just in a meeting where the Chicago mayor talked about they're having a break finally in their homicides. They only had 500 this year. So there's not a comparison. Denver's still one of the safest big cities in the country. But when it comes to these type of numbers, we all should be alarmed and concerned, and we are, and we're trying to figure out what it looks like. I wish I had the answer to it. I don't know, but I know our department, our public police department is working hard at trying to address it and trying to take a more comprehensive look. You hear about harm reduction issues. You hear about our opportunity index rolling out of the safety department, because we recognize to impact these numbers, it takes more than just police response. It takes the ability for the whole community to say, what are those things that give us indication that we may have some problems?
When Denver police eliminated public access to scanner traffic, the chief said that it would increase transparency, which seems to me like that's some pretty wild Orwellian doublespeak. But are you satisfied with the way that Denver police has handled communications to the public after they cut off access to scanner traffic? It's often days before we hear about homicides.
Yeah, I think, listen, I support the police chief and the department's move toward, you know, around the scanner issue. This is one that does fall to the issue of safety, not only for the police department, but the victims and protecting their identities. And I have also talked to the chief. He took me through the entire apparatus of how he plans to communicate, when information made available, when it can be helpful to the investigation, and also help us in terms of you know, elevating the issue that's going on in the community at hand. I'm comfortable with those, and we're going to continue to work to improve it with regards to media. He has made a commitment to sit down with anybody, talk about how he can better improve that communication, and I have tremendous confidence in Chief Pazin to make sure that he continues to communicate with the community as necessary to make sure that we're aware, to keep everyone safe, but also to know what's going on with regards to certain investigations.
So just to double back,
yeah.
You're satisfied and comfortable with the idea that there can be a homicide in Denver. Denver police are the sole holders of that information, and they wait days to tell people.
You know, I think, well, I mean, the reality is that you all are covering those homicides. You're also, I have not seen an instance where we're holding information when a homicide has occurred, where we really need the community to lean in on this. We recognize that solving these crimes are not just police related. We need the community to lean in. And I believe that the police department will be very responsible to make sure that we're getting that information on the community, because we got to solve these crimes, and we want the community to be aware when we believe that they may have a safety issue as well.
Let's talk about housing and development. So there are neighborhoods across the city that are looking at new neighborhood plans. And one common concern that I've had is that people understand why you want density, why you want more housing. They want transit to come with it,
yes,
to accommodate it, and
right,
they fear the density will come, the transit promises will never come,
right,
and the messes will get worse. Is that a fair concern?
Well, it's a fair concern, and yes, a fair, valid concern. But I will also say that with regards to our comprehensive plan, 2040 plan, transit and density are parallel. And the goal is that where you have transit, you're building density. And where you have planned transit, you're building density. And that, to me, made more sense. And that came from the community. That made an awful lot of sense to say, we're going to solve this problem. Obviously, we don't want all those people who are living in higher density units to be driving in single occupied vehicles. So let's build it through mass transit systems. And so that made a lot of sense, and that's what we're committed to as we plan out communities. But that's also why we're doing these neighborhood plans, because those conversations need to be pulled out. People need to know where density is planned, make sure that the transit is planned accordingly, if not, if it doesn't exist already, and make sure we're holding the whole system accountable.
We're coming up against the end of our time. We'll have more time to talk at the town hall tonight on the Auraria campus, focusing on students there and millennials. But I want to touch again on this issue of how Denver develops, because it impacts so many different things.
Absolutely.
At the risk of paraphrasing former Governor Lamb's statement that got him in a lot of trouble, does Denver have a duty to densify?
We have a responsibility to have smart growth and smart strategic growth initiatives going forward to address our growth. We are a very desirable city. We're projected to grow even more into the future. And so density has to be a part of the formula that allows us to, one, create affordable housing, but also make sure that we're growing in a smart manner. So yeah, densifying is important. It's important to make sure that we are thoughtful in terms of how we address this growth without making sure that everybody feels kind of thing. We can continue to grow as a city, but we got to do it strategically, and density is a key part of that.
Do we have a responsibility as a city to accept and make room for anybody who wants to live here? I know that can sound like a really elitist, terrible thing to say, but at the same time, if you're looking at somebody who, say, lives on the west side of Denver, and they love it here, they love their neighborhood, they don't want to be displaced for density or something else. Is there ever a point when Denver says, nothing against folks coming in, but we are just not in a position to accommodate so many more citizens?
Let me answer it this way. If you study the DNA of great cities, what great cities don't do is to get in their own way in terms of desirability and growth. The reality, we recognize there's attrition. People will come, people will go. And the cities that take their foot off the pedal, a la Detroit, Cleveland, are cities that find themselves down the road in a lot of trouble, because you must never stop focusing on how do you want to manage that growth, or how you can keep yourself desirable in a city that people want to live. Listen, we were just in Australia working with companies that are scaling up in the United States. There are about 30 companies that are looking at Denver as well as 4 other cities, saying, we find you the most desirable city, one of the most desirable cities in the country. Should I say to those Australian companies, we don't want you here? Because the reality is they're going to come here with their companies that are scaling up, that ultimately become part of your Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. They're bringing jobs, they're bringing opportunities. At the same time, their companies are saying, I'm leaving Denver because it's time for us to look in other places. We got to keep that attrition moving, and we got to keep that supply moving in and keep our foot on the pedal, while at the same time addressing the issues that you talked about: density, mobility, safety, things that matter to all of us in this city.
Tonight, it's going to be students and community members who are going to lead the discussion at our town hall on the Averary campus. I have a couple extra questions I'll try to slide in later tonight as well, but I appreciate your time.
Good to see you, man, and thanks again for doing the town hall. It should be a good time.
Absolutely.